Oglala Lakota, Apubla Lakota, I won't let my spirits down.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my head into what I'm going to say. Hello, everybody. My name is Arlo Iron Cloud. I'm here across the table from the lovely Lisa, also known as One Shot, and she'll probably talk a little bit about that right now. But I do need to acknowledge Tanka Fund has taken the monumental responsibility of helping the return of the Tatanka, also known as Bison. I encourage you to check out their website, tankafund.org, and see how you can help support the return of our relatives, the Tatanka, because they are the sponsor for this series of videos and our work with the Tatanka Nation. So we're going to talk a little bit about our origin and how we got started and just information that we've gathered since we've been doing this. So I would love you to get us started. Talk about our origin, if you don't mind.
Our origin.
Yeah, our origin. We have an origin.
That sounds like way back.
I know, doesn't it? How so?
It sounds ancient.
How far back are we going?
So we're only going back to 2016. That's when we started doing the guided buffalo butcherings through Thunder Valley CDC, and that was through the director of the Food Sovereignty Initiative, which was Nick Hernandez.
Mm-hmm.
So we had talked about in 2016 starting butchering classes for both buffalo and deer and elk, because for me, I wanted to learn. I wanted to be able to learn how to butcher in a way where I understood the animal too as I was butchering.
Yeah.
So in 2016, I had talked with Nick and talked to him about this idea of doing traditional Lakota style food.
And he was like so receptive of it. And
He was.
I really admire how much he put into it. Like he didn't even need to work as hard as he did to get where we got. And he still continues to help us today.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, I remember this. So how do we connect? Like, I know we got there and we decided that we were going to start doing...
Well, before we even started, this was an idea, wanting to do these butchering classes. And there were so many obstacles that we kind of ran into. We had some people telling us we needed permission before we could go forward with these classes.
And how did you feel about that?
I was kind of curious of why. But luckily for me, I had already developed these relationships with some elders across the res. So whenever I had brought this to them, this information where some people were telling me, you need to have permission before you do this.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do it in a way that was good, that was, I guess, acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So I had talked to these elders who are my mentors and asked them about this whole asking permission before we got started with the butchering classes. And it was really interesting because they all had similar responses to that.
And what was that response?
And they said if we waited for permission, it was never going to happen. So they said if you want to do this, you need to do it, not ask for permission.
Now, at that time, do you recall, I mean, I'm not trying to say that you started or we started this. I want to know, do you have a recollection of anybody doing the work that we do now then?
Not really. I've heard of people doing the work, but not doing classes.
I mean, I also recollect, like, there are families out there that, harbor this knowledge, but I never really saw it on a scale that it was public. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's why I said, people did it, but not in classes. You didn't have, places to go to learn.
Right.
You would have to have had created a relationship with people who actually did it in order to learn. And a lot of times that was really difficult.
Explain that. Why was that so difficult?
Because a lot of people are very territorial with their knowledge and don't really feel inclined to share. So sometimes it's really difficult to get somebody to teach you. I think a lot of people are afraid that whenever they teach you things, like beadwork, for instance, that they're afraid that you're going to take it, claim it, and sell it.
Right.
So that's just my guess.
Right. And I agree with you on all that. I honestly believe that there are people out there that were a little skeptical, a little worried that this information was going to get out there. And I guess one thing, they're worried about them not receiving credit. Mm-hmm. Another thing is that they're worried that they're going to be considered a sellout.
Right.
I mean, there's all these things that really factored into the reasoning why they didn't want to share everything. And I get that. I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that at that time, whenever we were learning that, it was really important to make sure that we were aware of those sensitivities. You know what I mean?
Right. Because a lot of times it was, grandma taught me this and I'm not going to teach you.
Yeah.
Because grandma taught me it.
And I think what a lot of people don't understand is like the vast majority didn't have that grandma to teach them.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, because of that, a lot of people were afraid to ask too.
Right. And when you think about it too, because like the Buffalo Nation is so close to being associated with being Oglala Lakota, or Lakota in general, I should say.
Yeah.
And the competence that you gain from like having knowledge of the Tatanka, the bison, you really get that. Like you need to know this. You know what I mean? If you want to even claim to be Oglala, you need
it was cred. It was credit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Lakota credit. If you knew how to butcher, I mean, it didn't really have to be Tatanka.
Yeah.
But if you knew how to butcher, then that made you Lakota.
Right. It was a very interesting time for sure. But what would you say is the ticket? You know what I mean? At what point did you realize that, hey, we're on to something?
Is whenever we got a lot of feedback and a lot of people showing up to these classes that we had scheduled.
Yeah.
And made flyers for. I think initially we only had a few people show up.
Yeah.
And then after a while, it was like a lot of people.
It was like 200 people.
It was a lot of people. I don't know about 200, but yes, it was a lot of people.
For me, it was the Intertribal Great Lakes Intertribal Food Summit. That was whenever I thought, holy smokes, we're on to something. Because what happened is we got invited to one of their meetings, which was in Tama, Iowa.
Yeah.
With the Meskwaki tribe.
Yeah.
And whenever we got invited.
This was the first time they've ever done a buffalo butchering.
Right.
Yeah.
And whenever we got there, I don't mean to toot our horn, but we stole the show.
Yeah, I mean, for you, that was probably like, hey, we're on the right track when we got invited to that. But for me, it was more local. Because for me, it was like, if you get, that interest and that participation at a local level, and it's a lot of people showing up to do this, that's when you know that you're onto something.
Right.
Because you can go somewhere else and people are like, holy smokes, look at these guys.
Yeah.
They're teaching us how to butcher buffalo. But I think what really speaks volumes is whenever it's home.
Yeah.
And home is really inviting to you because you're providing this service.
Yeah, you're right. I guess so. I really like it whenever, like, there was an elder that made a compliment to me recently, and he said something along the lines that your knowledge is going to be very valuable in the future. And it's really hard to accept compliments like that, because that seems so massive.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever he said that, I just thought, wow, okay, this is on me now.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden you realize that you're the person to help lead in this movement.
Right.
Whenever we got invited to Tama, Iowa, and then later on, and then because of the pandemic, we didn't go back again. But like, the thing is that the amount of people that wanted to participate in a bison butchering was enormous.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that, and I get it. You know what I mean? Because we're the people of the plains. Like, we're the poster child of the plains.
Yeah.
And so having the ability to butcher was like your credit in order to get an understanding of where our food comes from.
Uh-huh.
So, but I thought it was interesting. What would you say is that your, like, if you had to like tell people that like the most interesting thing that you developed in this process, what would you tell them?
That whenever it comes to food, people let their guard down. That's the most interesting thing.
Explain that a little more.
Well, when it comes to like traditional Lakota style foods,
Yeah.
and it's really cool to be able to go places and do this and share stories and,
Right.
and things like that. But whenever you're at home and you have people who are, on the res that you're from, sharing stories of how they would hang their meat or how they would prepare certain dishes that aren't done anymore.
Right.
Is the most amazing thing ever. Because we do hoof tasiha, wahampi, the soup. So the soup is called te tasiha nashlogiapi wahampi. That is when you cook the soup down, the hoof.
Could you translate that real quick before you?
Te, the buffalo.
Yeah.
Tasiha is the hoof. Nashlogiapi is whenever it cooks until it falls apart, and then wahampi is soup. So that was one recipe that I had to kind of go back on memory, and not my memory, but other people's memory of eating it, because there was no real recipe for it. So whenever we would butcher, people would talk about, this is how we used to eat.
Yeah.
This is what my grandma used to cook. My mom, my dad used to cook this, and this is how they did it.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when it comes to food, because everybody's so used to putting their guard up, that whenever it came to foods, that guard, those walls slowly started coming down, and then they started sharing more.
Why do you suppose that is? Why do you suppose that whenever you started feeding them, that all of a sudden all these walls they had built, all of a sudden you could climb over, or the food could climb over, and all of a sudden the guard is down?
Because it's association with our relatives who passed on already. Because a lot of us have this attachment, this connection to grandma who's already gone. And one of the ways to remember her is through the way she cooked and the way she fed us and what we ate.
Isn't that iconic too? Like, everybody across indigenous communities across the world have this memory, this fond memory of how grandma cooked.
Yeah. Yeah, because everybody adores their grandma.
Yeah, almost everybody.
Yeah. Grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, whatever, parents, that. So when it comes to food, people, whenever they have those memories, whether it be traditional Lakota style foods
Yeah.
or commodities or whatever type of foods, you present that food to them, they're going to remember stuff. They're going to remember those times when they were sitting at a table or sitting in the car or, out harvesting timsala, whatever. And they take a break and they sit down and eat. Those are the memories that they remember through food.
Oftentimes, whenever we're sitting across the table from somebody in the community that has knowledge pertaining to the Tatanka, I often see them come in, sit in this chair across the table from you, and it's interesting because they'll sit down before the meal is even served, because you usually serve people whenever they come and talk with their knowledge. And I noticed this trend. They'll sit down and, just like any meeting, you're always real hesitant to say anything or do anything, because you're not exactly sure what the other person's intentions are, right? And all of a sudden they start eating the soup, and all of a sudden they're like, this is real. Or I don't know. All of a sudden, talk about that part, because whatever it is that goes through their veins or whatever they're eating, and they all of a sudden start opening up. Why do you suppose that is?
It's connection. Because all of us are searching for connection in some shape or form, where they come from. And everybody wants to have that ability to say, this is where I come from. And with us, it's food, because a lot of people, especially our age, don't really prepare dried meat. Some do. There's probably a handful. Or dried corn, or preparing timsala into flour.
Right.
Things like that. It happens, but it's not often enough. So whenever they come to eat or they come to learn how to make wasna, and we're pounding the bapa, which is gapa, whenever they're pounding it, then it's almost like they revert back to being that child or being that age, almost like a timestamp, being that age when they were preparing that food. Or even if they weren't preparing it and grandma was preparing it in front of them, they go back to that age.
Yeah.
Which is when they were innocent, when they were happy, they were carefree, so it's almost like a time travel. And I think that's why they allow their walls to come down, is because they go back to when they were innocent and they were happy and carefree.
Man, I just adore that part. I mean, I've bared witness to it, and I've watched it happen in front of me.
Right.
And I can't even begin to say how precious that moment is.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I could name everybody off and then give everybody credit and just, dedicate something. And I'm sure we do all the time. What I really appreciate about the way you teach is that you're always crediting the people that taught you.
Right. And that's how it should be.
Right.
Because I don't want people to think that, oh, here comes Lisa and, the things that she's sharing with us, and it's all Lisa, because it's not.
Right.
We always have to acknowledge those who've taught us. It's not just us. And I think that's what adds to it being as powerful as it is.
So let's talk about something else here. I really wanted to get around what people don't acknowledge whenever we're doing these harvests.
Uh-huh.
What would you say is one of the most compelling things when it comes to harvesting a bison? Because, for example, a lot of people seem to focus on the hunt.
Right.
Right. And I think that they overlook the vast majority of the harvest whenever all they think is the hunt.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah. There's something about the hunt and taking it down that's really different from actually harvesting the buffalo.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until recently that I actually started harvesting or taking down the buffalo myself. And that's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
I think whenever it comes to taking down the buffalo, it's almost seen as a masculine thing.
Right.
Not a female, not a feminine thing at all. And I don't know what it is, you know, about it. Maybe it's the fact that you're owning a rifle and doing something that only men do. I don't know. Whatever it is.
You know, that right there, there's been so many things built upon a false idea of what Lakota is.
Well, you know, there's things that contribute to that. So in the book called Americanizing the American Indian, there is a part in there about the whole butchering process where Thomas J. Morgan, who was the commissioner, actually had given some rules to the Indian agents regarding the butchering of the cows. And what they had wanted to do, what he wanted to do, is eliminate women and children from that process because he thought it was savage, you know. So he only wanted men to do that part. And then he also didn't want them consuming the guts or the blood because that was savage.
Right. Why do you suppose that is? Like, why do you suppose that was like the mindset of that? Like, only men do this?
Because European mindset is only focused on men. Men are the greatest. Men will always be the greatest. You know, they control everything. They're the ones who give the say-so on anything. You know, and women are just supposed to be submissive. You know, and the children are supposed to be submissive and do everything that he says.
Right. And then when you think about like hunting and harvesting, the vast majority today are men.
Right. Yeah, there's probably, I mean, the majority are men because that's what they portray.
Or that was whenever the systems that they were they grew up in and understood. Like, I don't know if it is necessarily like I don't know if it was necessarily like an act of evil, so to speak, but more of like all these young men just that's all they understood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they I mean, I'm sure if they had like their mothers and their grandmothers and their aunties involved, they would have been like, "Oh, I get it. This is mostly a matriarchal thing." Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of factors that play into that. You know, the whole hunting part. Because I think that a lot of times the whole butchering part is seen as probably the women's job. You know, they're the ones that go in there and have to, you know, clean the guts and separate everything. And, you know, men do the hunting and women do the butchering like that. So
I got a question for you. How does it feel? How does it feel to be the person whenever we do our harvests that you initiate the hunt? Because prior to this, it was me or Leroy. So,
right.
So like now, how does it feel to be the go-to person on this?
It feels pretty good because I feel like with a lot of things, we need to start taking stuff back. You know, they talk about land back. You know, why not take back our foods? You know, and kind of get that understanding that we were practical people and that if a woman needed to hunt, then a woman needed to hunt. They talk about women, warriors who had gone out and fought. And I know that there were women hunters too, but they don't talk about them as often, you know. So taking all of that back, like, hey, you know, we did that too. We were practical people. If it was me and my children and it was just us, do I sit there and I wait for a man to come and hunt for us? Hell no. I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure my kids are fed.
Right. So that your community is taken care of and this way of life is passed on.
Right.
I mean, and that's such a mother thought. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because I guarantee it, like as a father, that thought doesn't really come through.
See, and I wouldn't know that, you know. I just know what I know. And it's like, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to make sure that my babies are taken care of. You know, even if that means not being a man and hunting. Right.
And I noticed that it's so natural for so natural for you to understand that this is for the people that you're taking care of, versus where a man, and predominantly they think that like, oh, I'm going to go hunt something. I shot this from 300 yards and I was out hunting since 6 a.m. Like they turn it into something very masculine.
Almost like they have to prove something.
Exactly.
That they are a man.
It's almost like the ability to develop competence was moved into this European mind setting that killing was a glorified thing.
That killing meant you were strong and in control.
Right. It's really interesting too to that you, whenever you think about like how we harvest these animals, it's not anything new. You know, we have to take a rifle, we have to take it out into the field, and then we have to shoot an animal.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to the Tatanka, you know, whenever it comes to Tatanka, it's like they are confined to certain spots.
Right.
And not really given the ability to roam freely, right. You know.
You know, every time I go into a pasture and I look at these animals, I can't help but feel like, oh man, there's something about this that just isn't like totally right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, it is the way it is now.
Right.
You know, we just kind of have to work with it.
Right.
But I think that, you know, if people understood that, like when you go into a pasture and they see you, they know one of them's going to be taken out.
Right. I mean, when a truck arrives, they know it's food or it's killing.
Yeah.
And this is the part that really irritates me. It's that I think a lot of people have taken the romance of Plains people, Lakota people, and if you think about that moment, and I talk about this often, you think about that moment that is portrayed. There's a warrior on the back of a horse, riding bareback, wearing a bonnet, pulling a bow back, riding side by side the beast and releasing the arrow and taking the beast down.
Right.
That image, and I really admire this because Marty Tubles is the one that really cited it. Marty Tubles Sr., he's the one that cited it. He's all like, if you look at the time frame, it's this tiny, you know what I mean? Because if you look at the time from the beginning till now, like the idea of riding a horse, shooting a bow, first off, you have to realize that the buffalo are being eradicated at this time. The introduction of the horse is just right there. The manifest destiny is coming across, and like all these things are factoring into that one little bitty moment. And that's our portrayal. That's how we're thought of.
Yeah.
It's tough
It
because
is.
that's not even close. That's not even close to who we are.
It's all makes a good story though.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Yeah, that's the toughest thing, because there are beautiful things whenever we harvest. And I got to say that for me, whenever we do our community harvests with other tribes and peoples, the biggest thing is how well we come together. I cannot like, I know people, whenever they think about getting together, they're like, oh yeah, we all got together. But I see it from a perspective where it's almost like I'm witnessing my ancestors connect.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. That's my favorite thing whenever we do harvests, because there's community members getting together. My favorite moment is whenever all those ladies in Tama, Iowa got together, because they were like, oh, we know so-and-so, but then all of a sudden this bond glued them back together, and it was the Tatanka.
They all worked together to get it done.
Right.
Yeah. And what was really interesting about that part too was that they had waited a year on a waiting list to be able to do this.
Right.
And it had to get approved. So it was a year. The process took about a year. And then when they finally set it up and said, okay, this is the date, everybody that was on that list showed up. How amazing is that?
I know. It's interesting too, because you think about like how much I'm sure a lot of people would love to be able to harvest as many times as we do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they would love to be a part of that process. But like, it's like, I mean, the sacrifices and the moves that we had to make in order to get to that point are not a lot of people can do that.
No, it was a learning process for us too.
Right.
Because I think a lot of people had this idea that we came in and we were like, oh, we had all this knowledge and stuff like that. And it wasn't like that.
Right.
And I think that, when we were able to go and teach in different communities here locally too, here at home, even in different districts, everybody had their own stories of how they used to butcher.
We're still learning today. Most recently, we ran into Jason Balls from Wyoming, and I didn't even know that what maggot eggs look like. I had no clue. It's something that you think that a person who is seasoned as we are would know what those are, and all of a sudden it's like, holy smokes, I did not know that.
It's a constant learning process.
Right.
It's a constant process because, we're learning about like you said, the flies, the parasites, what to look for whenever we're butchering for certain things.
Yeah.
And certain parts of the animals, how to take care of it so that, we don't damage something and to be able to take it out intact. It's just so many things that go into this. And that's why I'm so grateful of this process, of this ability to teach, because even when you're teaching, you're learning.
Exactly.
If you allow yourself to.
Right. So in capping on this conversation right now, give me your interpretation of what people are missing out whenever you're harvesting, whether it's bison or plants off the land.
So it's the reality of it. I think the romanticism of, going out there and doing the ceremony before you actually kill the buffalo, the Tatanka, and prolonging that stress on the animal because he knows you're going to take him out. And if you, take your time to do these ceremonies before that happens, it's just that much more of torture that you're doing to him. But being honest and being realistic about it, and kind of putting him before yourself, because that, hey, this is going to lose his life so that he can feed people. So you want it as quick and as painless as possible. So being real about it and understanding that, this is life right here. There's so much to learn here. I think the most important thing to do is to be real and to cut away that romanticism and do everything in your power to be as respectful and as quick as possible.
I would like to thank Tonka Bar, all the people that have ever reached out to us, and the community members that have helped us. You guys are just the most amazing people ever. And to those people that are learning, I just want to say I encourage you, just keep moving forward.
Keep moving forward. I think that whenever you're learning, the most important thing to do too is to be kind to yourself and to tell yourself, I'm learning. If I'm going to make a mistake, if there is a mistake to be made, it's a learning process. I think that's where the healing comes from too.
All right, one shot. Are we done?
We're done.
Thank you very much for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
For Tanka Fund has taken the monumental responsibility of helping the return of the Tatanka, also known as bison. I encourage you to check out their website, tankafund.org, and see how you can help support the return of our relatives, the Tatanka. And all our affiliates, Doksha, thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Tukashila